The EU referendum is nearly upon us. This is I'm speaking on Friday, the Friday before the referendum. So this time next week we will know the result, for better or for worse. Um, Events yesterday will no doubt still be in the news when you watch this. Tragic. I'm not going to talk about it. I think that we should probably not speculate until we know all the details. But it undeniably happens in a political world where the discourse has become very unpleasant. On Thursday, Nigel Farage unveiled a poster which I'm sure you've seen the comparisons with the ones from 30s Germany. I mean, it's just abhorrent, the whole thing. It's become about immigration. There was, when the campaign started, it was about economics. I think the Remain case, it's fairly clear, the economic case. Basically, you've got every economist or organisation to do with economics saying that Remain makes sense. The figures that are bandied about by the Leave campaign are, they're just lies, I guess. I mean, they say that the Remain campaign uses scaremongering, and I admit it probably isn't the best way to do it. Say, your family will lose out by £4,000 if we vote to leave the EU. However, they are estimates. I think maybe the mistake was not reinforcing the fact they are estimates of what could happen, but they could happen, and they are valid estimates of the money that each family would lose because of reductions in national income and maybe higher tariffs on food and all that sort of thing we import. However, the figures given by the Leave campaign, classically, the 350 million a day, is false. They will even admit when you question them that it's false. We don't send £350 million a day to the EU. And yet, today I got a leaflet through the door. They're still, this close to the referendum, they're still saying we send £350 million a day to the EU. It's just not true. And it slightly bothers me that there is no law in this country that says you can't lie in political leaflets. People will be basing their vote in a very important referendum on the information they get through the door. And I'm sure you've seen the surveys that show a large number of people do believe that claim. Equally, they believe all sorts of things like the percentage of immigrants in this country is 20%, and we pay far more towards the EU than any other country when we don't. So there's a whole load of myths that over the years have been drip-fed by not just the people who want us to leave, like UKIP, but also the Tories. A lot of the Tories campaigning to stay in the EU, they're their own worst enemies, because they've been for years blaming the EU on all sorts of things which actually a lot of the time aren't the fault of the EU. But what bothers me most about the literature you get through the door is just the tone and the lies of the Leave campaign. And I got one through the door last week that said, help your local hospital, and vote Leave. And you think, this, just the whole idea of scaring people into thinking, well, maybe not scaring people, maybe that's not the right word. We're getting them to vote to leave the EU to help the NHS, when actually the people who are running the Leave campaign have a history of really hating the NHS. They've people like Daniel Hannan, who is to the far right of the Tory party, who has called the NHS the biggest mistake this country's made since the war, and has called for it to be privatised. Farage himself has talked about charging for NHS treatment. The right are not the friends of the NHS, and the Vote Leave people to use the NHS logo and to pretend that they care about the NHS bothers me very, very much. And it's true with everything else they're claiming, with vote for to leave the EU, we can spend all the money we spend currently on, I don't know, schools or whatever. It's all nonsense. There have been amounts of money we've had before that we could have spent on the NHS, which have gone to things like cuts in inheritance tax, so basically a tax break for the rich. That will happen again if these people were in charge of the economy. The money we currently send to the EU, let's ignore the fact all the investment we get back and everything, but let's just go purely on the money we send to the EU, would not come back to public services. It would go either on tax breaks or, well, not into the pockets of the people who need it the most, because if this government has proven anything, it's that they don't believe that's where money should go. So I have a real problem with the campaign literature. As for the immigration side, in this last week of the campaign, it's all just down to xenophobia and bigotry. one of the successes of the Leave campaign has been to get the people with the least in this country to blame people with even less for their problems. It's not the immigrants that have meant your public services have been run down. It's not the immigrants that have reduced your wages. It's years or decades of government which have basically prioritised the wealthy. And that's Labour and Tory governments. The wealthy have got wealthier and the poor have got poorer. That's just the way it is. But realising that and fighting the real enemy, who are the people putting the money into the hands of the rich, people like Philip Green, the real enemy are not the immigrants, certainly not the refugees. The refugees who have obviously nothing to do with the EU, they're not EU citizens. So the whole debate is toxic, and it really bothers me that such an important question is going to be settled by myths and lies and fear in people who actually have nothing to fear. The EU protects the people with the less in this country more than it hurts them. It's not perfect, it needs reform, but it really bothers me the way the debate's gone. And hopefully, come next week when this is all over, the Brexit campaign won't be handed a victory, because a victory for them will be basically taken as a mandate for their views, and their views are small state, help the rich, stuff the poor, more or less, or if at the very least more xenophobia and bigotry, and they will claim that there is a mandate for them to be very harsh on immigrants. It would be a scary place. It would be scary even if the Remain campaign wins, to be honest, because the genie's out the bottle now. People are out, just out saying stuff loudly about immigrants, and stuff that used to be on the fringes of the far right has now become worryingly mainstream. And we've got to really try hard to get back to where we were, a few years ago, when it was unacceptable to be quite so blatantly xenophobic. I'm worried for the future. I'm worried for my children. I'm worried for me. Our freedoms have been taken away. Our freedom to go and live and work where we want has been taken away by people who can always afford to do that anyway. And they're going to take it away from the rest of us through fear and intimidation and lies. What can you say? We do what we can do, but ultimately, as the last general election has shown, you can have the best arguments and facts in the world. If you have people who are spinning untruths to people, and popularism, it's a powerful force, and when the media are behind them as well, it's all a bit worrying. I'm really hoping for the best on next Thursday, this coming Thursday, but I do really implore you, if you do care about a fair and decent society where fear and intolerance and oh, Michael Gove, this country's had enough of experts. It's the celebration of ignorance and rhetoric over common sense and education and compassion. We can't let that win. We really can't. So do go and vote next Thursday, and do vote to remain in the EU. We can reform it from inside. Don't let this Leave campaign get their way, because I really fear for what society will become if we do.